Yeah. If you are here, I would like to make a request to you. If you like my talk, please contribute whatever you may like to a charity or an organization of your choice. Okay, you can do it and keep quiet, or if you inform me, then I shall be delighted. Okay, so today I am starting this session after a gap of 2 weeks. Diwali intervened, and Trump and Biden, intervened. But it gave me some time to reflect on what I am going to speak now, today. Uh, Today, I am going to discuss the Advaita philosophy, the most famous and the most pivotal of Indian schools of philosophy. Advaita, as you all know, belongs to the Vedanta school of philosophy. The Vedanta school accepts three sources of authority: the so-called Prashna Prashnatrayi, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutra. The following were the most important schools of Vedanta philosophy. Advaita, of course, enunciated by Gaudapada and Shankara around 8th century CE. Visishtadvaita enunciated by Ramanujacharya in the 12th century CE. Dvaita enunciated by Madhvacharya in the 13th century CE. And then there are other schools also, Bheda enunciated by, Bhardas Prapancha and Bhaskara. They prospered, one prospered in the 4th century, the other was in the 9th century CE. Then you have this Dvaita Advaita or Swabhavika Bheda by Nimbarka, that is 7th century CE. Then Achintanya Bheda by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then 14th century. Then Suddha Advaita by Vallabhacharya. You have several such schools, but I will cover only the important schools. So that is Advaita, Visishtadvaita, and Dvaita, and to some extent Bheda school. Now, as far as Advaitas, they contradict what has been stated there. But before we take on Advaita, let us look into the Brahma Sutra. The Brahma Sutra is a most a prestigious text, and many great scholars have commented upon Brahma Sutra. Badarayana, the author of Brahma Sutra, or they are also called the Vedanta Sutras, maybe a contemporary of Jaimini, was one of the most interpreters of Vedic thought. Just as the Mimamsa Sutra of Jaimini was later defended by Shabara and Kumarila, the 7th or 8th century scholars, Badarayana's Brahma Sutra laid the basis for the development of Vedanta philosophy. There is the relationship between Vedanta Sutras and the Mimamsa Sutras, however, is a bit, it felt quite difficult to ascertain. Badarayana, in fact, approves of the Mimamsa view that the relation between words and the significations is eternal, which he discussed in my last talk. There are, however, clear statements of difference. See, Jaimini, for example, says that the dispenser of the fruits of one's action is dharma. The dharma leads to us, that it depends on that. But for Badarayana, this is done by the Supreme Lord, that is Ishvara. Okay, Jaimini did not require an Ishvara, but Badarayana clearly says Ishvara is required. He is a guy who is watching you all. That's what Badarayana says. The overall difference that emerges is that whereas Jaimini lays stress on the ritualistic part of the Vedas, Badarayana lays stress on the philosophical portions, that is, the Upanishads. The former recommends the path of Vedic injunctions, hence the ideal of karma. The later recommends the path of knowledge. The Badarayana recommends the path of knowledge. The central concept, as I said earlier, the central concept of Jaimini's investigation is dharma, that is, what ought to be done by us. On the other hand, the central theme of Badarayana's investigation is Brahman, that is absolute reality. The Badarayana Sutras have 4 adhyayas, 4 books, each has 4 chapters. The first is concerned with the theme of Samanvaya, that is reconciliation. There are, of course, the Upanishads and the Shrutis have many conflicting statements. Okay, and the Brahma Sutra holds that they all converge on one single theme, that is the concept of Brahman, the one absolute being from whom all beings arise and in whom all of them are maintained and into whom all of them would return. The second book established so-called Avirodha, that is consistency, by showing this. That is, what they say is the Sankhya dualism or the Nyaya Vaisheshika atomism, which we discussed earlier, are neither sustainable interpretations of the scriptures, nor could they be defended rationally. Second, that consciousness cannot conceivably arise out of a non-conscious nature. That which is what the Sankhya philosophy says, Prakriti. The material world could arise only out of spirit. That's what Badarayana says. Third, the effect in its essence is not different from the cause. That is, the cause doesn't produce something which is absolutely new. This also Badarayana holds. Then the other thing is, though Brahman is all perfect and has no want, creation is an entirely unmotivated free act of delight. That is Leela. That is what called Leela. Okay. The Buddhist view that there are no external objects but only minds and their conceptions is refuted, as also the Buddhist doctrine of momentariness of all that is everything changes, the continuous flux. This is rejected by Brahma Sutra. Only Brahman is eternal. That's what and the third and the fourth chapters of the second book aim to show that nothing else is eternal. The third book of Vedanta Sutra concerns the spiritual discipline and the various stages by which the jiva, that is the finite individual, may realize an essential identity with Brahman. How to merge with Brahman. Of course, the fourth and the last book deals with the final result of the modes of discipline outlined in the preceding books and distinguishes between the results achieved by worshipping a personal Godhead and those achieved by knowing the one Brahman. That is, if you can worship a personal Godhead, you will get something, and if you achieve, if you realize Brahman, you will be something else. Okay. So this is in short, and I just wanted to know, because Brahma Sutra will be discussed again and again and again. So this in short, I wanted to give a small introduction to Brahma Sutra. Nothing much is known about either Badarayana or where he lived, all those things nobody knows, Some people say the Brahma Sutra was written by Vyasa. We need not go into all those things. Now, let us discuss some of the predecessors of Shankara, especially Bharata Prapancha, the Veda guy. The Upanishads, there are three things which are important in the Upanishads. One is Brahman, the Atman, and the wide world, the wide external world. The Upanishads are, the vagueness of the Upanishads, particularly in respect of the relation between Brahman and Atman, the individual soul on the one hand, and to the physical world on the other, was bedeviling every philosopher trying to understand the Upanishadic teaching. There are several statements with regard to the identities of Brahman, the individual, and the physical world in the Upanishads which needed harmonization. Some said the soul and the world are identical with Brahman. Some said they are different from it. One way of reconciling these statements is to give equal value to both and say that both are true. This is the view of Bharata Prapancha, who lived before Shankara. Brahman, according to him, is one, but its unity is such as includes variety too. His conception is thus of one many, the Veda, one many. The variety, as per him, is due to infinite number of selves it comprehends, as well as the numerous distinctions of the physical world. Okay. This is very important. What he says is, the variety is due to the infinite number of cells the Brahman comprehends, as well as the numerous distinctions in the physical world. Creation, as he says, is the explicit expression of his comprehension. Thus, everything subsists in Brahman. If you recollect, this is almost similar to the Sankhya school of philosophy, except that in the Sankhya school, it is Prakriti which is creating all these things, not the Purusha. Okay. So it is not the consciousness Prakriti that evolves here, but the very conscious and all comprehensive Brahman that evolves here. The individual soul, according to this theory, theory of what's the name? Theory of the individual soul, according to this, Bharata Prapancha, when it wins liberation, is not lost in Brahman, but continues to retain its individuality. That individuality is much transferred individuality. That's the entire personality changes once it wins its liberation. This is what he says. So according to this school, the path to liberation is neither adherence to moral and religious duty alone, nor acquisition of right knowledge alone, but a combination of both. Okay, they say you should do both. You should do your duty without expecting reward, and you should also acquire knowledge. Okay. The former purges the individual of his selfish impulses, nishkama karma, you do this. Asanga, that's entire thing, your impulses, it purges that. The later leads to liberation by dispelling his ignorance. If you attain knowledge, your avidya goes away. That is, your ignorance goes away. This view of double discipline for reaching moksha makes karma also a direct means to salvation. Here, of course, the Bharata Prapancha, he resembles the Mimamsa schools. Other schools of Vedanta also utilize karma as a means to release, but they assign to it a relatively subordinate school. Now, the Advaita school makes short work of this philosophy. Okay, so Advaita takes from here, it takes a leap. What it says, sameness and difference, that is Abheda and Bheda, are mutually contradictory, and combining them will make the entire ensemble self-contradictory. This is what the Advaita school argues. And self-contradiction is nothing but falsity. So the entire approach is false. Okay. Reality, in fact, what it says is, reality, in fact, transcends them and at the same time explains them. Okay. That's what it says. In a brilliant example, reality is compared to the sun. The sun is the cause of the phenomenon of day and night, but at the same time it transcends them and it itself knows neither day nor light. Okay. So the Advaita says that this is all bunkum, this is not right. So what does the Advaita say? Before I am coming to what Advaita system says, let us speak about Shankara. Okay. There are more than 10 works which profess to be the biographies of Shankara. All were composed several centuries later than the time of Shankara and are filled with legendary stories and incredible anecdotes, some of which are, many of which in fact are mutually conflicting. Today, there are no materials with which to reconstruct his life with certainty. His date of birth is naturally, like it happens to every other person, is naturally a controversial problem. You see, earlier he was assigned to, by many scholars, he was assigned to, late 8th century and early 9th century CE. Now, most scholars agree that Shankara lived sometime in the early years of the 8th century CE. Okay. According to the most accepted tradition, Shankara was born into a pious Nambudiri family, in Kaladi and the Periyar river, that is Purna river in Sanskrit, And he is said to have lost his father, Shivaguru, early in his life. He renounced the world and became a sannyasi, an ascetic, against his mother's will. He studied under Govinda, who was a pupil of Gaudapada. Okay, nothing certain is known about Govinda, but Gaudapada is notable as the author of the important Vedanta work Mandukya Karika. Shankara has written a commentary on that, if I am not mistaken, in which many scholars say that the influence of Mahayana Buddhism is evident. Biographers also narrate that Shankara first went to Varanasi, or the city of Hinduism, and then traveled all over India, holding discussions with philosophers of different creeds. The most notable is his heated debate with Mandana Mishra, a philosopher of Mimamsa school, and Mishra's wife served as an umpire in that debate. Okay, this episode might be a historical fact because there is a there is a keen conflict between Advaita school and the Mimamsa school, because Shankara regarded the knowledge of Brahman as the only means to final release, while the Mimamsa school emphasized the performance of ordained duty and the Vedic rituals. Okay, they say if you do this, you can realize, wherever you want to go. That's what the Mimamsa school felt. Okay, more than 300 works, commentative, expository, and poetical, all written in Sanskrit, are attributed to Shankara. Most of them cannot be regarded as authentic. Of course, his masterpiece is his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, this Brahma Sutra Bhashya, okay, which is the fundamental text of the Vedanta school. The commentaries of the principal Upanishads are also, all of them excepting one, I think, are all genuine. And then, as I said, the Mandukya Karika, there was a commentary by Shankara and the Gaudapada Mandukya Karika. And it's also possible that, Yoga Sutra Bhashya Vivarana, the commentary on Yoga Sutra, this was also done by Shankara. And then, of course, you have the Upadesha Sahasri, which is a good introduction to Shankara's philosophy, which is not a commentative work. Okay, there's only a non-commentative work. Everyone agrees, anyone who read Shankara in Sanskrit agrees that his style is, style of writing is lucid and profound. Penetrating insight and analytical skill, characterize his works. Okay, this is Radhakrishnan's word, it's not my word anyway. His work, of course, revealed that he not only was well versed in the orthodox Brahmanical traditions, but also was well acquainted with Mahayana Buddhism. He is often criticized as a Buddhist in disguise by his opponents because of the similarity between his doctrine and Buddhism. But despite this criticism, it should be noted that Shankara made full use of his thorough knowledge of Buddhism to attack Buddhist doctrines severely and to transport or smuggle some of them into his own Vedantic non-dualism. In fact, some scholars say that his predecessors, in fact, they became extremely Buddhistic, Vedanta, like Gaudapada and others. And Shankara, he made a very valiant effort to Vedantize the Vedanta philosophy. This is what some of these scholars say. Okay. Now, let us come to the actual Advaita system. The Mimamsakas, we have seen, were stout defenders of common sense. For them, the world is as you and I see it, and it has always been so. This is the view of the Mimamsakas. Shankara could not agree less. For him, the world is an illusion. Okay, it's diametrically opposite. The illusion masks the single underlying reality of Brahman. To accept the reality of everyday world is ignorance, avidya or maya. To know the sole reality of Brahman and the identity of self, the Atman with Brahman, is to achieve liberation. As Shankara himself repeatedly points out, this doctrine is stated quite clearly in numerous Vedantic passages. As per the Advaita, that's what they argue, So the Mahavakyas, Prajnanam Brahma, that is, insight is Brahman. Prajnanam, Brahma. Insight is Brahman. I am Atma, Brahma. That is, this self is Brahman. This self is Brahman. And of course, Tattvamasi. That essence is thou art that. That essence is you. And Aham Brahmasmi. That is, I am Brahman. And there are other texts also. Texts such as Brahman is without a before and an after, without an inner or an outer. Brahman is this self here which perceives everything. These are all, Shruti sayings of Shruti. The finest essence here that constitutes the self of this whole world, that is the truth, that is the self. This is again another quote. It is Brahman alone that extends over the whole universe up to its widest extent. Okay. There are several such passages. All other thinkers were also aware of these passages, but as one scholar says, it is Shankara who put them at the heart of Vedanta. Okay, these pivotal, they are pivotal to the Vedanta philosophy. Before and after him, all other Vedantis, quite a few other Vedantis accepted that Brahman is Brahman is the true single source of all things. But they also said that the world we see around us is real. They said everyday reality emerges as a modification of Brahman, which has taken on the forms of things we see around us. Okay. Shankara, however, denied that. He said there is only one fundamental reality, that is Brahman. Brahman is not two. Brahman is single. Brahman is supreme. Brahman is ineffable, unchanging. Now, how does Shankara prove his stand? Okay. Is Gaudapada, whom Shankara acknowledges as his Paramaguru, okay, initially he formulated the doctrine of Ajatavada, that is the doctrine of no birth, meaning that the world never came into existence. The only reality being Brahman, the world we experience could never be there. Thus, it is not right to say that Brahman caused the world. In defense of this system, Gaudapada, in fact, he tried to reject the concept of causality, that is cause and effect. Okay. Again, I will remind you, that is if curd is the effect, milk is the cause. Okay, the cause and effect thing. No, Gaudapada reject the concept of causality and the consequent impossibility of change being real. What he did was, he did a very clever thing. He simply posed two opposing views of causality against each other. Okay, that is and then by negating each other, he said they themselves established this Ajatavada. What he says is, some disputants wish to say that the existent is born. Okay. That is Bhuta, that is Bhuta is born. Others say the non-existent is born. Okay. That is, some say that the cause is born. Cause is there everywhere. No, that's what one set of people say. The other set of people say the effect is totally new. It is again born. It is different from the cause. Okay. Say the curd is not milk. That's what someone says, The other guy says gold jewel. You take a gold jewel is gold. It can again return to the state of being gold. But curd cannot do this. Okay. So what he says is they quarrel with each other. Really speaking, neither the existent is born nor the non-existent is born. Okay. The quarrel of this these two proves that nothing is born. This was the argument of Gaudapada. Shankara, in fact, improve upon it. Please listen to me carefully. This is very, very fascinating, arguments. These arguments are very fascinating, in fact. Shankara, in fact, improved on this argument. His conclusion was essentially to be the same denial of change of causality, but it was much more sophisticated. See, as we have seen earlier in the Nyaya Vaisheshika, I will slightly elaborate this so that you understand this properly. As you have seen in the Nyaya Vaisheshika system, the effect was something genuinely new and not merely a manifestation of what was already contained in the cause. Okay? That's what it says. The effect and the cause are two different things. Everything, whenever effect comes, effect is a new thing. It has nothing to do with the cause. Okay? This is, earlier also I have spoken about this. The curd, for example, is not the milk. This is the Asatkaryavada or Arambhavada, which we discussed earlier, in my earlier talk. The other view, diametrically opposite view, was that of the Sankhya school, which is called the Satkaryavada or the Parinamavada. This holds that effect could not be anything other than what was already contained in the cause. That is, a clay pot is after all clay, or a gold jewel is after all gold. Okay. Shankara, like Gaudapada, he argued against both these theories, freely using the arguments of one against the other. He would thus want us to think that on the one hand, the effect was something new, while on the other hand, it could not be anything new. In other words, what Shankara tried to prove was this. The concept causation was infected with an unsolvable internal contradiction. Okay. So if one quotes gold, the other quotes milk. So they are contradictory. Okay. So what he says is, Shankara says, this concept of the causation was inflicted with an unsolvable internal contradiction. So his logical leap is, thus, it could only be an illusion. This is Shankara's Vivartavada. So Shankara said, the effect is an illusion. The cause alone is real. And what appeared as the effect is an illusion. Thus, Brahman alone, which is the cause of everything, is real. All its effects are illusory. The Advaita term of illusion is avidya or maya. Shankara proceeds to prove that the felt reality of everyday view is unreal. Okay, how he does that? Let us take the famous rope and snake example. When somebody sees a rope in the darkness, he thinks that it's snake and he gets frightened. And when the light comes, he realizes that it's not a snake, it's after all a piece of rope. See, we saw a snake earlier also. We saw a snake where there was a piece of rope. This is avidya, according to the Advaita school, in two ways. First, it covered up the real nature of the object, that of the rope. Okay. Secondly, it projected something imaginary upon the object, the snake that was not there. But what was the nature of the imaginary object itself? Okay, that we will have to find out. Okay, it could not obviously be real or something really existing, because when the illusion goes, when the light comes on, the snake disappears and the rope comes in. But neither could it be purely unreal. That is, there is always, snake is real. No, like a rope, snake is also real. Okay, this could not be purely unreal. So Shankara gives an example for this, a beautiful example. Shankara says, It's not non-existent as the son of a barren woman. That's what he says. It exists. Okay. Because such a thing could not be the object of uh, an actual perception. Like a son of a barren woman could not be an object of a actual perception. So what he says is, this rope, when you see the being thus neither real or unreal, the Sat or Asat, it could only be described as Anirvachaniya, which means the unspeakable or indescribable. Because of avidya, one perceived a snake in a piece of rope. The same way we perceive world in Brahman. Our ignorance, avidya, maya, Maya, on the one hand concealed the real nature of Brahman, but projected a false world upon it, that superimposed a false world upon it. Thus, this world, like our snake, is indescribably unreal. Liberation comes once the true nature of Brahman is realized. Okay. This is the argument of Shankara. But Mimamsaka said, wait a minute. You are saying, they're sharp guys, Mimamsaka are sharp guys, They say, you are saying the snakiness of the rope is not real, but the ropeness of the rope is very much real. Okay, the snakeness of the rope is not real, but the ropeness of the rope is very much real. Only by accepting that the ropeness of the rope is real can one prove that the snakeness is false. But there is a catch here. If you accept that the rope is real, the very conclusion of the Advaita is that the entire experience in the world is real will come a cropper. Okay. To counter this argument, Shankara comes out with an ingenious formulation. Okay. He graded truth or satya into three categories. One is pratibhashika satya, which is illusory reality, seeing a snake in a rope. The other is vyavaharika satya, that is practical reality. The third is paramarthika satya, that is ultimate reality. The snake perceived in the rope is illusory reality, and its existence is really temporary in the human sense. We know immediately that as soon as the light is on, we know that it's not a snake, it's a rope. Okay. The rope perceived in the rope is practical reality. Okay. That reality will remain as long as the world remains. Okay. The rope perceived in a rope will appear real to you so long as you don't realize Brahman. That's long way away. Okay. Until such time, this will remain, this will be real to you. So this is how he justifies the day-to-day activities, what we do, everything. It's not life denying. He says, no, you will have to live this life. That's what he says. Though it is unreal, you will have to live. There's no other option. That's what Shankara says. Okay. The rope perceived, again I will say, the rope perceived in a rope will appear real to you so long as you don't realize Brahman. So is this world. The world will appear real to you so long as you don't realize Brahman. This is the Vyavaharika Satya. Once the final Satya, there's the ultimate reality, Paramarthika Satya is realized, the falseness of the rope will be clear. Like the falsity of the snake was clear when lights arrived. Mimamsa taught that matters of dharma are taught only by the Veda. Shankara, on the other hand, says that we could never know the truth of Brahman if left to our own devices. This is very important. What I am going to say is very, very important. Listen to me carefully. Vedanta, the Mimamsaka philosophy says dharma, whatever is there in the Shrutis, they matters of dharma, that they are taught there. That's enough for you to attain liberation. But Shankara says that if you do your karma, you will never attain your liberation. Okay. Advaita says that Advaita in fact is grounded in interpretation of the sacred text, not in philosophical arguments. Okay. So what he says is your knowledge is important. You should know. Not you don't do the rituals without understanding it. You should know what is written there. That's what he says. Shankara again and again he says, Shrutis are important, but you should understand Shrutis. You should understand what is written there. Okay. Mimamsaka on the other hand, you say if you do the rituals, you will attain, liberation. Okay. You do whatever is the dharma which is prescribed in the books. If you continue doing those dharma, you will attain liberation. That's the Mimamsaka logic. Okay. Since many of Shankara's rivals, like the Sankhya schools, also accept the authority of Vedic literature, he frequently tries to refute them simply by quoting scriptures that fit better with his own view than with theirs. In fact, Shankara even complains that Sankhya makes reference from experiences of the world around us when you should be appealing to Shruti, the sacred text. For him, their empirical approach, their practical approach is wrong-headed. We cannot learn Brahman, Shankara is very clear, from observation of the world, because the world is precisely an illusion that masks Brahman. In itself, Brahman is formless. So even with the resources of the Shruti, it eludes both thought and speech. Shankara says the closest we can come to an experience of Brahman would be an experience that is empty, utterly devoid of form, as it happens in moments of deep sleep when you are not even dreaming. Most thinkers, both within and outside, the Brahminical tradition, Jains or Buddhists or anyone, okay, they all believe that even the deepest understanding needed is to be combined with long practice. Okay, that's what he said. You will have to practice something, that's what he says. But for Shankara, such things as, meditations or yogic exercises or rituals may be useful as a step towards liberation. But ultimately, liberation is secured only through knowledge. If you really come to understand that your individual self is identical to Brahman, you will be immediately freed from all suffering and, for that matter, from all pleasure. This is because Brahman is unchanging and remain unaffected by the processes and experiences the individual self undergoes as a result of avidya, as a result of his ignorance. So we reach liberation, Shankara says, slowly by being slowly weaned away from individual self. We give up everything. We give up jati, we give up caste, we give up family affiliations, we give up the desire to engage in rituals. So we give up everything. We give up rituals because Brahman can never actually, the real Brahman can never acquire the fruits of such rituals. Okay. Now, a question may be asked. Does this not amount to Sunyavada, that is nihilism, total nihilism? After all, Brahman, as you say, is formless and ineffable. Okay. So when Shankara says Brahman alone is real, he seems to be saying that the only reality is actually nothing at all, which is as good as Sunya. There's nothing is there. Okay. But this is not quite right, Though Brahman is not confused with the individual self, the Jiva, our own life, Brahman is still recognizably a kind of self. It is for lack of, but we don't understand that. That's what they say. That way they say. It is for lack of better terms, consciousness or awareness. However, it's not ordinary consciousness. It's a special, pure kind of consciousness that is not aware of anything in particular. Consider, earlier again the example of deep sleep. According to Shankara, when you are asleep like this, there's not just pure emptiness. Rather, he says, it is like an act of seeing without any visible object to see. Okay. So consciousness is evident to itself when there is nothing of which it is conscious. Okay. It is conscious only of itself and nothing else. It is not conscious of nothing else. The example given again is the sun is itself luminous before it illuminates other things. Is it clear? This is very important, He says it's not Sunyavada, mine is not Sunyavada. Okay. I am not saying that it's emptiness, it's not emptiness. Some people may say that again, you may again push him further, Yeah, this is a fine, is a fine distinction, this how does it make so much difference whether there's nothing at all? On the one hand, one guy says there's nothing at all, and you say that there's nothing except a conscious self, which is in fact not conscious of nothing in particular. Okay, that's what you say. No, you say the other guy says Sunyavada says there's nothing, and you say there's only one thing. There's a conscious self. But that conscious self is not conscious of is not conscious of anything in particular. So what is the difference? Okay, to Shankara, it makes all the difference. Okay, let me it makes all the Shankara, all this makes all the difference. Okay, this emerges from remarkable critique of Buddhist thought found in his commentary of this Vedanta Sutra. Okay, the Advaita rejection of everyday reality looks very Buddhist, in fact, as to his faith that liberation will ensue upon a proper understanding of the self and his admission that the Vedic rituals and others become irrelevant for the liberated person. With this dismissal of jati, caste, family, everything as aspects of illusory self, Shankara, in fact, veering round to the idea that all people can potentially be liberated. Okay, just as the Buddhists did. But that's a problem for Shankara. The Vedanta Sutra very clearly says that Sudras will be excluded from this path of liberation because the Sudras don't have the right to read the Vedas. Shankara had to admit that they cannot study Vedas. Even Ramanuja admits that. But he holds out the prospect of other forms of learning. So he wheels around that problem. Okay. But overall, he seems to think that every human being can be liberated if he attains knowledge. That's what Shankara says. So in any case, all these these borrowings from the Buddhists did not stop him from attacking them on philosophical grounds. In fact, Shankara complains that Buddha taught several inconsistent theories, all of them false, perhaps because he was such a spiteful character that he deliberately wanted to confuse people. This is what Shankara says. He says, all Buddha taught many inconsistent theories, all of them are false because he wanted to confuse people because of his inherent spitefulness. Okay, this deliberately rude remarks suggest that Shankara did not feel any sympathy for the Buddhist tradition, and that this very clearly shows. Okay, but Shankara, how he opposes the Buddhist theories. Let us see at least one or two. The Buddhists hold. This is very important. This is very important thing. See, Shankara, in fact, when he says Buddha is inconsistent, he forgets that even the Upanishads are also inconsistent. That's what they are trying to do. The entire purpose of Vedanta Sutras were because Vedanta Sutras was that because Upanishads are inconsistent, they want to reconcile. Okay, so inconsistency may not be such a big sin, but Shankara, he wants to use any stick to beat Buddha with. Okay, but Shankara, how he attacks Buddhism, I will give one or two examples. Let us say Atman. Okay, Shankara aims his fire at the Buddhist view that there is no Atman. Okay, instead, Buddhists they hold that instead of Atman, there are only momentary features or acts of consciousness called skandhas. Okay, these cause one another across time, and they aggregate themselves to create the illusion of a coherent, enduring individual. It's like a cinema reel, it keeps on going, but it's not real. It's like a cinema. Cinema, you see what you see is real, but in actual life it's not real. It's like that. That's what he says. That's what it's called skandha. He says the acts of consciousness is called skandhas. There every moment is separate. That's what he says. Every moment is. This is the Buddhist view. Shankara, in fact, offers several arguments to refute this theory. For one thing, it is hard to see how a skandha that exists only fleetingly at one moment can cause another skandha to exist at the next moment. Okay, how does it happen? This is what Shankara asks. For at that time, you should be causing the new skandha to arise. It is already gone. Okay. So here Shankara says, you cannot create an effort, okay, by a non-existent cause. Okay, when skandha is non-existent, it can't create another one, another non-existent one. One non-existent one cannot create another non-existent one. This is what Shankara says. Let me repeat this. See, what he says is, effects cannot depend on non-existent causes. Okay. If you call one skandha as non-existent, it cannot create an effect, another effect, which will again be non-existent. Okay. So here, skandha is evoking a plausible assumption of its own, namely that effects cannot depend on non-existent causes. Furthermore, Shankara says, in real life, the phenomenon of memory shows that the same individual does survive over time. Okay. For part of what we remember when we look back at a past experience is that it was we who had that experience. For example, when I fondly remember eating masala dosa this morning, I am in no doubt that the person who enjoyed the taste of that masala dosa, the same person who is sitting now and speaking to you now. This argument about memory doesn't seem to sufficient by itself. That's what Buddhists say, because they have another, alternative explanation to offer. Buddhists say that it only seems real to you because the former aggregate of skandhas is identical to the present aggregate of skandhas. That's what they say. Okay. Because of the causal link between these two. Okay. It's like seeing the same film again and again. That's what they say. But Shankara says, he says, oh no, I told you already. Okay. A skandha cannot create anything, Its effect is non-existent because your earlier one is absolutely non-existent. That's what he says, Shankara has already blocked this response when he insisted that momentary nature of the aggregates prevents them from forming such causal chains. You can't have a causal chain because you yourself say that it is momentary. The skandha is momentary, so it can't create a causal chain. Then when it creates a causal chain, it becomes more or less permanent. That's what he says. Okay, this is how Shankara contradicts the Buddhist argument. Okay, the other important argument, which is really funny against the Buddhists is this. The Vijnanavada, it rejects everyday reality as an illusion. Believe it or not, Shankara dismisses this scornfully. Okay, he says it is futile to deny that external things do cause our experiences, since this is patently obvious. He speaks like a Sankhya man or a Mimamsaka man. Experience clearly involves both a subject and object. Yet the various Buddhists being attacked here have managed to deny both, doubting both the existence of an enduring self, of real things for us to perceive. Okay. Now you may wonder, how can Shankara, of all people, be insisting on the reality of the world around us? Doesn't he, just like his the Mahayana Buddhist opponent, take the world to be a mere illusion? Okay. In fact, this is precisely the response made by Shankara's own opponent and critic, the rival Vedanta commentator Bhaskara. He accuses Shankara of rank hypocrisy, insisting on realism when responding to the Buddhists, only to fall into anti-realism when setting out his own Advaita teaching. Okay. This inconsistency, of course, seemed to deepen when we look at other sections of his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. For every passage emphasizing the illusory nature of all things other than Brahman, we can find another passage, like Upanishads, we can find another passage suggesting that Brahman does really produce the world. We see the world we see around us by taking on form. We find Shankara emphasizing on Brahman, emphasizing that Brahman can make the elements of things without using any instrument or pre-existing material, like the spider that produces his web from nothing but itself. This is Shankara's example. And he insists that, Brahman is the stuff out of which things are made, as well as being the agent that makes those things. And he also distinguishes between the higher Brahman, the Parabrahman, Aparabrahman. He says, the first, divide of form, the other, of course, in which it takes forms, okay. So there are so many things like this, But when you read him closely, when you watch him closely, okay, what he seemed to say is that all these things are in answer to the Buddhists. What Shankara seems to say is that we cannot just reason our way to the unique reality of Brahman. He says, this is a truth found only in Shrutis. you can't apply logic to that. Okay. But Shruti is rejected by the Buddhists. So it is entirely consistent for him to say that the Buddhist has no basis for rejecting the deliverance of everyday experience. When you don't believe anything, when there's no authority, okay, when you come to argue, there should be a base. Our base is Shruti. It says Brahman is there. From there I am arguing. I am trying to reconcile our contradictions. Okay. But you have nothing. Okay. So you cannot take a dual stand. I can take a dual stand because there is Brahman. I say that there is Vyavaharika Satya. No, that we know. That and there is different types of Satya that we know. Okay. So, but this we can take because we believe in Shruti. You don't have anything. You don't have anything. So you can't take a contradictory stand. Okay. So Shankara again very clearly says that even when the authority of Shruti is accepted, he does not believe that we should just immediately abandon everyday experience. Okay. In fact, the final thing, the final thing of realization of Brahman is the last goal, is the last mile for Shankara. Okay. Till this last mile, the other Satya will exist, the Vyavaharika Satya will exist. That's what he says. Okay. So, before we go to the last mile, it is a useful step on the path of liberation to think of Brahman as a fundamental underlying cause of real things that makes our life easy. We should then realize that effects are somehow implicitly present in the causes. The effect is not wholly non-existent before it manifests itself, like the earlier example, the son of a barren woman. Okay, so there is some truth in this. That is the Vyavaharika Satya. So if effects are not somehow prepared or contained in their causes, anything could be produced from anything, like making masala dosa out of glass. While this account of causation already improves on the Buddhist account, we need to make the further realization that effects are nothing other than the causes. This is Shankara very clearly says. Parts are really just clay organized in a certain way. It is not on the basis that we can understand the forms imposed on the underlying cause as in fact unreal. Shankara speaks here of superimposition. The guise under which Brahman presents itself is a kind of mask or a series of masks. It is sheer ignorance to mistake the mask for what lies beneath. Okay. Which is what he means, that it is ignorance to confuse a real thing with a property that is falsely ascribed to that thing. Okay. So only by following this fairly arduous and challenging chain of thought will you be ready for the radical conclusions of Advaita Vedanta. And without, what is most important thing is, without the prompting of Shruti, you would have no reason or warrant to follow the argument to his conclusion. That's why Shankara says Shrutis are important. Okay, Shrutis are very, very important. Okay, so we should never forget that Shankara looks ultimately to the Upanishads, the sole source of our knowledge of the unchanging consciousness of Brahman. What is Shankara's concept of God? While Brahman is absolute and without any attributes for the day-to-day functions, we need, that's when Brahman is absolute and without any attributes, okay, we need God or Ishvara for our day-to-day activities. This aspect of Brahman is called the Saguna Brahman. The Saguna Brahman is ultimate reality assigned with attributes. Saguna Brahman is the universal principle endowed with such cosmic functions as creation, maintenance, and dissolution. That is, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu. Okay. Saguna Brahman is the concept of creative joy, and Saguna Brahman is the supreme artist of this world. Okay. Shankara says that when Brahman seen through Maya have these qualities, he is called Ishvara. Okay. Again, we have also gone through this, the Sat Chidan Anand, Sat being the existence of Brahman, Chit being the consciousness of Brahman, and Ananda, of course, is bliss. These qualities of Brahman are viewed through Maya's illusions, and once these qualities are stripped away, one is left with the pure essence of Brahman, which is Nirguna Brahman, or without any attributes. Okay. So Ishvara is related to the world and defined through that relationship, whereas Nirguna Brahman is Brahman in itself and beyond all definitions. It's very, this is Shankara's concept, And thus, for our day-to-day experience, I am very, very, very clear. For our day-to-day experience, we need Ishvara. Okay, we need the rituals, we need the dharma, we need the entire world, okay, to act. But to realize Brahman, we need knowledge, we need jnana, which is, of course, provided in the Shrutis. This is what Shankara says. So now I come almost to the end of my talk, but before finishing my talk, I want to emphasize on one important point. When Advaitin says, the Mahavakya, Tattvamasi or Aham Brahmasmi, they don't mean that man or a woman, that is you and me, and God, that is Saguna Brahman, are one. That will be blasphemous, in fact. Okay, they don't say that. We are, in fact, a bundle of adjuncts. God or Ishvara remains unattached. This is very, very important, You say non-kadavul, that's not a very correct statement, That's not what Advaitins want to say. I say jocularly in many places but that's not really Advaita, in fact. Okay. So, we are a bundle of adjuncts, God or Ishvara remains unattached by any human adjuncts such as love or hate or grief or loss, It is attachment which implies preferences and exclusions. But God, being equally attached to everyone, is really detached. Okay. This is again the Beda argument. It comes to that anyway. Anyway, is really detached. The popular religion hails him as the creator of the universe, and Maya is the power that helps him in creating it. In this form, he becomes the efficient cause of the universe. He is like a great magician who brings forth out of himself the whole spectacle of the universe. He is not deluded by the spectacle as we are, for he is fully aware of his actual character. That is why evil and other things, don't touch him at all. Thus, as long as we live in this world, as long as we, the human beings, exist, the world exists, we need God. We need His help, His blessings. But what must not be forgotten by us is that what is real is the absolute. God or Saguna Brahman or Ishvara is like a, what should I say, it's like a strong creeper winding up to the infinite. We must keep holding them tight and move slowly up until we realize the absolute. When the absolute is realized, the creeper will disappear.